Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Anna Nielsen, and we're going to talk about conflict. We've all been in a situation where we've had at work at some time. If you work with more than one person, you've had conflict, I'm sure. And we're going to talk about it, how to deal with it, and actually use it as a competitive advantage, and actually use it as a way of innovating, which for me is like, wow, this is mind-blowing stuff. Before we get into that, always I ask my guests, Anna, where can people find you?
Hi, thanks for having me, Tim. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm producing quite a bit of content over there. I'm just Anna Nielsen. And my website's pretty easy to find also. It's just conflictcapable.com. Yeah.
Fantastic. So you've actually had quite a journey, haven't you, in terms of the world of conflict. You were 10 years at a non-profit. You had to, because of that, you were actually trained in conflict. So talk us through your journey about how you got to where you are today.
Sure, great question. So let's see. I've been in nonprofit leadership for about 10 years now. And during that time, I got to work at a place called Conflict Resolution Center here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a community mediation center. And during that time, people started calling our organization and from companies all over and saying, we have conflict and we don't know where it is. Not Anna and Tim aren't getting along, or we can identify where it is, but can you come and sort of detective this and figure out where it is? And while I was there, I was able to do a lot of civil mediation work, got trained as a civil mediator, trained people to be civil mediators, and then got trained and experienced in a lot of different facilitated dialogue and conflict resolution modalities, and sort of moved on from that role and worked in a lot of amazing mission driven organizations. And one thing that I noticed was that everywhere I went, the same problem existed. It's that conflict was keeping those people and those organizations with these amazing missions and values from either reaching or exceeding their potential. And so I kind of carried all of these skills that I had with me in my backpack and started sort of ideating what could I do to fuse all of my experience together. And so here we are at Conflict Capable Solutions.
Because I've worked for organizations where we had to change. In my last corporate role, which was back 7 years ago, we were, and I don't want to use IT jargon too much, but we were a traditional on-premise company. We were selling software. And what
Mm-hmm.
we needed to do was we were being disrupted by cloud or SaaS vendors. And what we needed to do was move from one area to another. And what we had was a leadership that said we needed a change. And then we had all this vested interest underneath that said, SaaS will never take off, cloud will never take off. This, they're wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
and I tell people this story and they laugh, which is that, well, everybody's cloud now, it's but there was conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a massive impact. I mean, the saying, there was blood on the walls. There was blood on the walls, and that was
I
because
believe that.
many of us, and I would see myself as one of those at the time, didn't understand how to deal with conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So talk. Why do we get conflict in organizations?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, you named a couple of things, and that's people's ideas sort of being ignored or pushed aside. But the major two things that I find that cause conflict are unmet needs. So you named one of those, the need to be heard. And then the second thing that causes conflict is a deeply held belief about ourselves that's under attack. And so I think even in your example, we can see that both things could have happened, right? You had a need to be heard and you weren't, and you believed that you had knowledge that was useful, so you believed that you were smart, innovative, and forward thinking, but no one asked you. So in your case, in the example you just used, both of those core things that cause conflict were at play. And so innovation can't happen when we have conflict is innovation, conflict is progress from my point of view. So that's a sort of radical perspective that I have about it.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, what I saw was people that were very good and skilled at what they did um,
Mhm.
were. I worked for an organization. We had a reorganization every year. So at the 1st of June, which was our new financial year, there would be a reorganization, and
Mhm.
the CEO actually prided himself on the fact that he could do this reorganization, and what would happen is that we would move the whole of the company, all 120,000 of us would move and do something else. Now,
Mhm.
yes, there was yes 80% of us did that, but also 20%, so 20% of 120,000 didn't move. But I think a lot of organizations are in this situation where whatever it is that they need to move to do something that today which they weren't doing yesterday.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so and how would so and all of that, if you think that there's all those people saying I have a deep seated belief that this isn't the right thing to do.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that when we don't ask people what their perspective is and impose something on them, it's obviously really can be really damaging for the culture. And in an ideal world, what I'm working towards is getting organizations to really have a strong point of view about dissent and about conversations around conflict so that you're not stuck, that starts to happen and you're stuck in fight or flight mode. No one's shown you the way about what you're supposed to say, how you're supposed to say it, what you're supposed to do. And so you're just sort of stuck in this culture that tells you not to speak up. So being conflict capable is all about getting to a place where everyone has the same skills, words, phrases, and it's something that the culture upholds, models, and reinforces. So everybody within the culture would use it.
So what you're talking about is actually using conflict as a way to, because what we're about now as businesses is to create a culture,
Mhm.
an inclusive culture that includes everybody, and
Mhm.
that may also require us to change. So quite often leadership will say, well, I can't go to the team and say we're going to do something different because that creates conflict.
Mhm. It's okay for that. It's okay for it to cause conflict. Is part of what we're missing.
Mm.
And what comes from conflict is imagination, innovation, and options that we didn't have before. And often in conflict, we're getting answers to questions we never asked. And I think that's the most fascinating part of it. So if you're creating a place where people can speak up and people can dissent or share opposing viewpoints, in that becomes a more robust discussion about all of the different perceptions about what would make the organization better. And that's what we're really aiming to get to. But if we shut that down and don't allow it, or in a lot of places that I'm familiar with, the culture says, you know what, open door policy, come on in. If you have something to say, come on in and sit down. And people come in and sit down and they have no idea what to say. They haven't been given any ground rules, they haven't been given any training, they have no idea. So when we can give people actual words to say versus broad ideas about what conflict resolution is or isn't, that's really powerful because then that dissent or that conversation has a container to sit in.
So you have a process, don't you, in terms of how you um, or guide rails in the way that you deal with or you teach conflict, don't you?
I do. Yeah. I think it's really important to sort of make it tangible and tactical for people about what does it mean. I can say conflict capable, and I think sometimes you can get that little bit of an eye roll, like that sounds pretty Pollyanna. That sounds pretty aspirational. How do we get there? And so I'm really clear about that. The first thing we have to do is shift our mindset to at least wonder if conflict can be something other than terrifying.
Mm.
I'm not asking people necessarily to make the leap to where I am, where I see it as a tool for progress and innovation. But let's start to shift, and then once we do that, with that shift in place, we can start to understand ourselves in conflict and other people. There's a just like there's personality typing, there's conflict styles that people have and don't know much about. Almost no one I meet has been exposed to it. And then lastly, with those two things, what we do is we learn, practice, and model the skills and the words and the phrases. And it all comes down to something I've created called the conflict capable method.
So give us an instance, give us an example about of how that works.
Sure. So let's say that you and I are in some sort of, we were in that meeting, and that example you gave earlier where we're going to do a reorg, and we're a conflict capable culture. So you're equipped with the same tools as me. And I might come to you and say, hey, Tim, earlier, when you saw me get so upset about this reorg, it's really difficult for me. And I know that conversation got tough. I'd like to solve for that. Okay,
Right.
so you know what solve is. So you don't have to go into fight or flight. You don't have to wonder, did she go to my manager? Did she file a grievance? Did she gossip? What happened? You know what's going to happen because you know what that word means.
So
Or
like
what those
so solve is like a safety word where you're using that word and saying, right, okay, this is a trigger to basically implement the process that we both understand.
Yes, you got it. So, and I joke with people, conflict, people just immediately shut down. So if you say, I feel like we have some conflict, people are like, oh no, I gotta go, I gotta run. So I don't care if people replace, I joke that you can replace the word conflict with banana, and
With
you can
banana,
say,
yeah.
we have a banana.
Mm.
I want to solve for that. But the important part is that everyone knows what solve means. So you're equipped. You know what the steps are. You know what the culture expects. And if you went to my manager and said, Anna and I are having this banana, and I just don't know what to do. Your manager in the culture in this example would say, well, did you use the solve method? And if you say no, they say, get out of my office. So it empowers the culture to self-resource this stuff. So we're not having managers spending, 3 hours a week trying to manage conflict, or $359 billion a year.
How much?
$359 billion a year.
It's more than that.
Yeah, it must be. But
When I've had to deal with conflict all the time. It's an energy sapping process as a leader.
it is. And what if it could be something that actually gives you something that if you lean into it and start to see it the way that I see it, or in new ways, whatever kind of new way works for you, and all of a sudden you're harvesting, no matter where you are and what conversation you're in, you're grabbing all of the best ideas. Your intellectual capital stays because people stay with you.
Well, there's a classic saying about banging people's heads together, and I've just had to bang Steve and Geraldine's heads together. It's like, and one of the things that I'm a terrible delegator. I will delegate everything as much as I can. And some people see that as a strength. Some people see it as a weakness. You take it as you want. But the thing is that my view was that Steve and Geraldine need to sort this out themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And why am I getting involved in this? Because I've kind of got other things to do. And I'm a great believer that people can sort themselves out. So being able to say to Steve, you may be upset with what Geraldine said, but solve method.
Mm-hmm.
Beat it.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, we would be maybe nicer than that, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're talking about that piece of and actually giving people a shared power that maybe wasn't there before. Because if in your earlier example where you said, things were being imposed, well, that's not a great feeling. No one likes that. And aren't you a stakeholder in the organization? And I think in the world that we're in, where we're calling it, it went from great resignation to great reimagining to whatever it is today, who knows? But now's the time for us to be thinking about ways to really give people a sense of belonging, a sense of power, and a sense of being a stakeholder in everything that happens.
Yes, and I agree. And actually, part of the Great Resignation and or the whatever it's been called this week is actually about empowering the employees, and that empowerment actually involves sorting themselves out. So
Right.
so they can't keep delegating upwards conflict.
Mm-hmm. Because if you're a leader and you don't have most people have experienced exactly zero training in the workplace for conflict resolution. And if you're a leader, that's terrifying when someone's coming to you and expecting you to have an answer as their leader or their manager, and you can't do it because you're terrified of it too. And I think what I'm hearing lately from a lot of people is that it's really the fear really comes from being unprepared.
Yes.
So we can say use I statements, or we can talk about, and psychological safety is a big thing. It's really, really important, but we also have to it's a yes, and give people all the like truly the words to say and phrases to use. So that when they are leading, they feel like they have what I call conflict confidence, which is something that can really change your life. It's really, really powerful.
Yeah, a friend of mine, I said to him, what was the difference between an individual contributor and being a leader? And he said, and he described it as more shit, but the same size shovel.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're dealing with, Steve will ring you up and say, I can't come into work today. I've got a puncher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll go and sort it. Um, you know,
Right.
but there's this delegation upwards of the issues which they should be empowered to deal with.
Right. And especially just, obviously things that rise to the level of an actual human resources issue, violation, sexual harassment, blatant racism, all those things that's not the level that I'm talking
No, no,
about.
no,
I'm
no,
talking
no.
about, interpersonal squabbles or differences in ideas. And when people really when they get into that space where they aren't, they're not delegating the conflict elsewhere, and they're saying to the employees, go to each other, those people might come up with a world-changing idea just because they got out of being stuck and started generating options for what's possible between them. And they might come to you after that hard conversation and say, hey, Tim, we've solved this problem for our company. We think we've got it. And you say, great, what is it? As opposed to, oh my gosh, you have a conflict, don't come in here. Because as soon as we do that, we're losing all of those great ideas. And that's what's really, really, really important, is to keep them.
And you see conflict really as a tool for progress, and
Mm-hmm.
also conflict as a way of collaboration and innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when we get to think about a time, even interpersonally, when you were in, it could be with your spouse, where you're kind of stuck. You're not talking because you got mad, and so you walked away. And maybe at that point it was the right thing to do. When you come back together, you've got to try to figure out, even if it's through yelling, whatever modality, but how to get out of it. And now you have ideas for how to not get there again. So by putting conflict as the thing that we want to do last, or as I like to say about conflict, the term conflict management just sounds like a rash that we need to put ointment on.
It does.
We want to make it go away. Whereas we should be saying something about how do we build these skills? How do we build these capabilities? Because then we can grasp all of that great innovation that's out there.
Yeah. And I think whatever size of organization, one of the things, I went from a company of 120,000 people to a company of two.
Yeah.
And even with two people, you can have politics.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you work for yourself, you can probably have politics with yourself. So there's always politics, whatever size of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it does require talking. But I agree with you, having a structure and a framework that allows you to deal with conflict. So because you can end up just shouting at the person.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as we get frustrated, we just start raising our voices, and that doesn't help.
Right. And we're scared because all of what's about to happen is an unknown. And it without a method or without these skills, it's an unknown, and it's tied to your livelihood. So we can say we have an open door policy. We can say, come on in, let's talk it out. But when I'm thinking about how I have kids to support, and no one's told me what's acceptable, then even more fear. So it's just fear on top of fear on top of fear, unless we really give it our attention.
Yeah. Anna, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about.
Thanks for having me.
I wasn't sure whether to start it with an argument or, no, it's such a crucial thing. I mean, it all happens to all of us within an organization. I think having tools and frameworks to actually deal with it, and I totally agree with you that and to be able to deal with conflicts properly will allow you to create a great culture and innovation within that business. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. I've been looking forward to this discussion, and a whole bunch of people I know have been saying, I can't wait for you to have that as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Hey, and so remind people where they can get hold of you.
Sure. So I'm Anna Nielsen on LinkedIn. That's where I'm creating the most content right now. And you can subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter there. And then I am conflictcapable.com.
Fantastic. Anna, thank you so much for coming on today, and I really appreciate it. And I'll see you soon. I'll see you on LinkedIn soon.
Yeah, see you soon.
Thanks.